All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the brand new Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I've recorded more than 5,500 interviews since 2003, almost all on foreign policy, and all available for you at scotthorton.org. You can sign up for the podcast feed there, and the full interview archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. All right, you guys, introducing Lyle Goldstein. He's formerly at the U.S. Naval War College. He's now at Defense Priorities and at the Watson Institute at Brown University, the Cost of War Project, and all of that. Welcome back to the show. How you doing, Lyle?
I'm doing great, Scott. Good to be back with you.
Good to have you on the show. And man, you wrote this really important thing that I read the whole thing of. Threat inflation, Russian military weakness, and the resulting nuclear paradox. Implications for the war in Ukraine for U.S. military spending. A few major points here, but let's start with, you got it right on this show that, yeah, they're going to invade all right. And I was skeptical because it was something that the U.S. government said. And actually, I did think my main argument was a decent one, which was that William Burns is going to see a peaceful resolution to this somehow, because if there's one person up there who knows what he's doing, it's the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. That's pretty good, but apparently not. But anyway, So I give you credit for that. You definitely saw that the line had been crossed. And I think, as you said on the show, it was the attempted putsch in Belarus in, was it 2021? That really was the final straw for Moscow before they moved on Ukraine here. But so I guess before
I remember distinctly in that time frame, I think it was somewhere around 2019 even, that Putin started talking about red lines. And, he's not going to use that word unless he means it. And I don't think it was recognized with adequate seriousness. By the way, I follow China too, and they're also using this word a lot, and I think they know exactly what it means. And there's a failure to take these things with adequate seriousness, I think. But my view that the war could have been prevented by wise diplomacy, but that was fully lacking, in my view.
Yeah. Well, and I'll brag that at least the original version of the book that I'm working on now, which was a speech that I gave in 2020, that I had asked you what you thought of it, and you said you endorsed the thing. So that's the minimal version of the same speech that I gave just a week after the war began. But essentially the same narrative being that Bill Clinton and W. Bush and Barack Obama and Donald Trump and Joe Biden got us into this mess.
Yeah, it's very sad. I'm always explaining to people that there's a lot of paranoia, nationalism, and a lot of delusions on the other side as well. But Russia, as I point out in this research that I just published, is it is a Russia is certainly a great power, but a weakening one, and that's been true for a long time. And I think it's well known that powers that are facing very difficult circumstances will be inclined toward making desperate moves. So that's what you have in Ukraine.
Mm. All right. So, and those are, I guess, kind of the major points of the study, right? Is one, we don't need a big buildup because we can see that Russia clearly is not a threat to Poland or probably even Lithuania or something, right? And also that this paradox that you're talking about, that, geez, if they don't have much of a conventional force, what does that leave them with?
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, I honestly, I kind of hesitated to write this study because I thought the points were so obvious, but maybe it's not. The people need to reflect on the fact that if you look at Russian military power in the aggregate, if you put aside nuclear weapons, that Russia's military is weak and has been weak for decades. I mean, there were whole literally were for more than a decade. Russia hardly built any warships or put any aircraft into its air force. So I mean, we shouldn't at all be shocked that it's that these forces are not performing well in this Ukraine war. Now, I will say some of us, including myself, probably overestimated Russian military capability in some respect, but in general, this is a force that has been plagued by accidents, that have been occurring right along. Yes, occasionally, they'll come out with a new fighter or something like that, or a new submarine. So it's not to say they have no capabilities at all. That's people often say, Russia's military may not be 10 feet tall, but it's also not 2 feet tall. That's right. But the main point that the U.S. defense budget is something like 10 times that of Russia. And then when you throw in the NATO aggregate defense budget, and by the way, that does not include Japan, which Russia is very worried about Japan generally. And Japan has quite strong armed forces, although they don't call them armed forces. They call them self-defense forces. But, in other words, Russia fully mans up its Pacific fleet and guards its Pacific frontier, quite carefully because they're worried about it. But I'm not even including that in these aggregate figures. But if NATO aggregate defense spending is something like 20 times, not quite, but almost 20 times that of Russia, then you appreciate that Russia is from a military standpoint, in quite a desperate circumstance. And by the way, part of Russia's military weakness on the conventional side is that they do put a lot of resources toward the nuclear side. I mean, the amount of Russian military people working just on nuclear weapons is very large. But again, this is partly a result of their in what they consider very inadequate conventional military forces.
Mm-hmm. All right, now, so there's a couple of things here when it comes to the current war and the threat of nuclear weapons. I mean, first of all, I think it's important that we have, quote unquote, adults such as yourself talking about the risk of nuclear warfare here, because, I mean, sorry to be a jerk about it, but just from the point of view of John Q. Public, and I was raised this way, so I know that this is right, that essentially no nukes means like hippies with signs outside, but not experts in suits who know about this stuff. And all the wonky wonks at their think tanks have a very smart nuclear weapons policy, thank you very much, and don't need advice from a bunch of liberal hippie women out chanting in the street kind of attitude. So then when somebody like Henry Kissinger and George Shultz and William Perry and yourself say, hey, listen, these machines are really dangerous and they could be used, and we need to be very careful about what kind of steps we're taking in a confrontation with a power like Russia. I think it's really important, and I hope, because of the social psychology of the situation, wow, that's the guy from the Naval War College, huh? That people stop and take a listen in a little bit different vein, that it's not really a joke. And of course, my primary concern, and I learned this, I guess I've known this my whole life, but especially Daniel Ellsberg is on about this, is the virtual impossibility of a limited nuclear war, where essentially once nukes start going off, everybody escalates until we're all dead. And there's essentially no way out of it. You might as well have Donald Rumsfeld sitting in every chair. So, I guess, but also let me go ahead and bring up the situation on the ground in Ukraine. Putin says, come on, that's a bunch of propaganda. Just because I threaten to nuke you 50 times, me and all my staff, doesn't mean we're going to do it. And you're just trying to pretend that we need to do it when we have no need for nukes whatsoever. And of course, they would face plenty of problems if they did nuke Ukraine, not least of which would be the east winds and the blowback, the literal backdraft fallout onto their own territory. But anyway, so that's a lot to chew, but I know you can do it. So what do you say?
Well, I mean, I think the risks are there. Listen, I'm very pleased to hear Vladimir Putin say at Valda, I believe it was on the 27th, ironically on the anniversary of the most dangerous day of the Cuban Missile Crisis. But we can talk about that a little. That's interesting. But he did say fairly emphatically that Russia has no intention to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. So I find that statement encouraging because now, of course, we know that the Putin is not always telling the truth. He's often playing chess, and I think it's fair to say on the nuclear question, he's been talking out of both sides of his mouth. On the one hand, offering very robust warnings that are clearly nuclear, and on the other hand, here denying that he has. The way he put it was, "We have no need to do that." Which kind of leaves a bit of an out, right? Meaning, if the need does arise, he would do that. So, to me, on this matter of nuclear weapons, words are cheap, and we need to think deeply about interests and how the situation is evolving. And I remain extremely concerned about the nuclear issue. Before the statement, I must say I was my how to put it, my concern had reached, if you will, a peak level. Because I'm watching this battle unfold in Kherson, and we all know very well that the Russian forces in Kherson are supplied over that wide river. It's a challenging situation for any military, and Russia could face a kind of desperate situation. Now, again, do you really want a power with something like 10,000 nuclear weapons to be in a desperate situation? I mean, no, you absolutely do not. And I must say, I think, well, I would like to believe that there is no possibility to fight a limited nuclear war. I wish that was the case. That's just not how I see it. And we have to deal with objective reality. And the unfortunate truth, in my view, is that Russia is rather well prepared for a limited nuclear war. They have all the weapons in place. We, on the other hand, do not. And I'm somewhat glad of that, because it suggests that our view, that we are extremely reluctant to go there, and we should be reluctant. But I can't say that Russia is reluctant. I mean,
well, the news law was.
Hold on, let me walk that back. Of course, they're reluctant. They know they would suffer, an enormous loss of prestige. You're right to point out the radiation problem. It's not a small problem, I think they would have to be utterly desperate to do it. On the other hand, I have documented, and those of you, on my Twitter feed, you can see at Lyle Goldstein, you can see I documented now probably nearly a dozen very overt calls from Russian hawks saying, "Hey, we need to use this now." And by golly, it will be militarily useful. This is what they're saying, not me, but they are saying it will be military useful because Russia, because now the Ukrainian forces do have large concentrations of armored vehicles and infantry, and those, can be dealt with tactical nuclear weapons. So I guess, I continue to be, I'm happy that Putin made this statement. I would like to see a lowering of tensions overall, just in general. I do think the more this war goes on, the more likely we are to see escalation to the nuclear level. And there's so many ways that escalation could occur, not just a Russian first use because of a battlefield issue. By the way, one last thing I'll say here, and again, we can chew through the details here, Scott, and we should, but there was a study at Naval War College, unclassified, so people can find this on Google, I think. And I participated in that study. Naval War College, we brought in the best experts on both nuclear strategy and also on Russian defense policy. We put them in a room and asked them some tough questions, like when would Russia ever use these things, that is, tactical nuclear weapons? And the conclusions were very stark. I mean, on the one hand, they said Russia is extremely reluctant, unlikely to use these in any scenario. However, there was one caveat, one scenario where they did see use as quite possible. That was identified as Ukraine, and also noted that if Russia was losing on the battlefield and these losses were, humiliating enough to threaten the survival of Putin's regime. I think we're in those circumstances. And that's very scary. I mean, I'm just saying this was all predicted and thought out by people who were not swayed by emotions, who were just thinking, logically through a set of scenarios back in 2019. And this is all in an unclassified study that's on the web, I think.
Mhm. Well, I think the Director of National Intelligence confirmed essentially that same argument as their high confidence assessment to the Congress in a hearing. So that,
Mm-hmm.
yes, we judge that if they lose the war, that the Putin government might consider that an existential threat to themselves, therefore the state, therefore the nation, and take it that far right then and there.
Right. And, so I think if the U.S. is smart and our allies will play our cards correctly, we should be much more cautious, I think, and start to seek an end game. I just floated across my desk minutes ago a new article in Foreign Affairs by Priebe and Cherub, I think, that is saying, hey, even if a peace in Ukraine is not right around the corner, the United States needs to start laying the groundwork for a way to get there. So I haven't read the article carefully, but I intend to. But it's encouraging to see that a kind of blobby publication like Foreign Affairs, that they're starting to discuss real diplomacy. It's appalling that there is no diplomatic track with Russia right now. It's that if there was one lesson from the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's that we must communicate with our opponent or adversary, whatever you want to call it, especially in a nuclear crisis. To me, it's unforgivable that Blinken and Lavrov are not speaking on a daily basis.
Well, I mean, I think the only communication between them is just the American threat. If you use nukes, this is what we will do to you. That was the report. Is they made it very clear, and then they've pretty much made it clear publicly what they would do. That they would, and there's multiple sources saying this. David Petraeus notably seemed to speak for the administration when he said that they would destroy the entire Russian military, conventional military in Ukraine, and sink the Black Sea Fleet. And that's after they're already using nukes. So what do you think they're going to do then? And they just say like, that'll work though. Trust me.
Yeah. I mean, I've read some of those discussions, and probably not all of them, but I don't find that threat credible because I think the United States knows that it would be, that would be the end of the planet. That's why, to me, I'm not, again, I wish this was not true, but I do think, in a way, Russia has trumps here on the nuclear side. Why? Because they hold substantial superiority in tactical nuclear weapons. Okay, they have many thousands of these, and they're easily deployed. We have a few hundred, and they're not easily deployed. So
they're sending more now, and that was what they announced.
They are, but this is these are. I can explain why I don't think these are easily deployed, but in a word, these are airdropped weapons, so that requires quite a bit of handling. Right.
How insane is it that they're sending more tactical nukes to Europe right now in the middle of this crisis? Is that supposed to be some smart move in a game of bridge or something that I don't understand?
Well, it's another. To me, it's another desperate move. I don't think. They're grasping for some kind of counter move here, and they're looking for the right level to show resolve and capability without setting off an explosion. But I guess just to finish my thought, there is, I think Russia has superiority in tactical nuclear weapons. That's pretty extensive. And moreover, they have at least parity at the strategic level. So, I mean, unfortunately, my understanding of how this might look is a fairly wide scale use of these things. In other words, I kind of doubt they would just deploy one or two. I think it would be more like a dozen. I don't know how the West would respond, but if the West did respond as you said, and I guess Petraeus has said, but other smart people like Richard Betts, who I respect very much at Columbia, said, well, our immediate reaction would be like massive conventional strikes across the board. At that point, I would expect Russia to unleash part of its strategic arsenal, meaning taking out an American city or at least an American base, to say, okay, is this where you want to go? Whether it could be stopped at that point is a legitimate question. I don't know, but that's kind of my picture of the stepping right up to the apocalypse. And, I hope Americans realize just how incredibly dangerous this is. I mean, the president said, I think on October 6th, he said, we are closer to Armageddon than we have been in 6 years. I mean, that is just it's an incredible statement, and should make all of us reflect. In my view, Americans should be in the streets. Like, why? How did we get here? As a national security specialist, I'm incredibly embarrassed for my profession that we allowed this to get to this point. We should never have been here, and it's it's a terrible day. We're not doing our job right. We're not keeping the American people safe if we're that close to Armageddon. So I'm depressed and humiliated, but we try to carry forward and prevent the worst.
Yeah, man. Well, listen, there's a couple of points here now. One thing is about the current troop buildup and force buildup inside Russia, the conventional force, the reaction to their loss of northern Luhansk in mid-September there. And according to Daniel Davis, who I know, he's also at Defense Priorities, your colleague there, who I know that you guys know and respect each other's work.
Danny's terrific. He's such an ace. Yes.
Yeah. So he says there's a big conventional assault coming, and his only question is whether they're going to cut through Belarus and try to flank the Ukrainian forces in the west or not, but that it's coming as soon as the ground is frozen and hard, so they don't have to stick to the roads anymore, and they can just blast through like the Americans in the Iraqi desert and do whatever they want. And so I wonder what you think about that part.
Well, I think that is possible. I mean, I have seen some signs of that, including, I think, what I believe in the last, since Russian forces pulled back from Kiev, and generally focused on Donbass. My sense is that they have been holding a lot of forces in reserve. Now, look, a lot of people don't realize, but Russia has to hold a lot of forces in reserve, right? Because they don't know. They may be at war with NATO in a week. And like I said, they're worried about, they have other worries, not just what's going on in the Caucasus, which is kind of dismaying, but over in Tajikistan, and they have concerns in the Far East, as I pointed out. So, I mean, Russia just cannot leverage all of its combat power against Ukraine. They must hold, this kind of strategic reserve. Now, can some of those reserves be deployed as for a kind of new set of winter offensives? The truth is, I haven't seen any hard evidence either way. I mean, we have seen some Russian troops go into Belarus. My guess there, and it really is just a guess, is that those forces have been more of a feint, kind of an attempt to have the Ukrainians believe that they have to watch their backs, that they also cannot put all their combat forces, say, into Kherson, that they need to hold forces back closer to the western border with Poland, just in case. So that's kind of how I read that. Now, I guess it depends what kind of risk that Putin is willing to take. I mean, like I said, my overall evaluation is Russian forces are strapped, and I don't see a lot of light at the end of the tunnel there. I mean, it's true that, like I said, we haven't seen some of their crack regiments and their elite forces. Haven't seen them fighting much in the last 4 or 5 months. Again, which may imply holding out for this later offensive. Trying to apply some of the lessons they've learned. Yes, using. I have seen hints that Russia's eager for the leaves to fall, because once the leaves fall, then they can, really uh, take out a lot of the Ukrainian positions that are hiding in various forests and stuff like that. I mean, of course, that now kind of goes the other way too, though, as Ukraine has more and more artillery systems, so forth. And the cold also cuts both ways, right? I mean, it's not like Ukrainians don't know anything about winter, so I'm not so positive that everything turns in Russia's favor this winter. If I were a betting man, I would say we're going to see more stalemate. Maybe. I mean, Russia seems to have stabilized the line and seems to be again making incremental progress around Bakhmut. And I guess yesterday the Russians are claiming a new breakthrough in the around Ugledar, which is near Zaporizhia a little bit. So, we can maybe surmise that instead of going for the ultra risky strikes against the, Western Ukraine or Odessa, that maybe Putin has taken kind of a middle ground, which would be to push hard into try to capture more of Zaporizhia. So that I think is quite plausible. But to me, I wonder if everybody looked at Putin's this land grab, if you will, the annexation of the four Ukrainian oblasts. Everybody took that as an extremely aggressive maneuver by Russia, and yes, one can interpret it that way. But another interpretation would be they were looking to the end game, meaning Putin has thought carefully about his next moves and doesn't see any great military moves. He understands that this is more or less a stalemate, and he's just trying to shore up his support and claim his land, these areas, and wants to kind of move to a settlement. And they have been right along for the last 2 or 3 months. The Russians have been saying we're ready to talk. So to me, I don't know. I guess that's a long way of saying I'm uncertain. I think we shouldn't be surprised if Russia launches winter offensives, but on the other hand, I don't think that they are, a sure thing.
Sorry, hang on just 1 second. Hey guys, anybody who signs up to listen to this show by way of Patreon will be invited to join the Reddit group. And I'm going to start posting stuff over there more. That's patreon.com/Scott Horton Show. Thanks. Hey, y'all, LibertasBella.com is where you get Scott Horton Show and Libertarian Institute shirts, sweatshirts, mugs, and stickers and things, including the great Top Lobsters designs as well. See, that way it says on your shirt why you're so smart. Libertas Bella, from the same great folks who bring you ammo.com for all your ammunition needs, too. That's LibertasBella.com. You guys check it out. This is so cool. The great Mike Swanson's new book is finally out. He's been working on this thing for years. And I admit I haven't read it yet. I'm going to get to it as soon as I can, but I know you guys are going to want to beat me to it. It's called Why the Vietnam War: Nuclear Bombs and Nation Building in Southeast Asia, 1945 through 61. And as he explains on the back here, all of our popular culture and our retellings and our history and our movies are all about the height of the American war there in, say, 1964 through 1974. But how do we get there? Why is this all Harry Truman's fault? Find out in Why the Vietnam War by the great Mike Swanson. Available now. All right. And by the way, in case it sounded like I was saying that Danny Davis said they're sure to win, he certainly did not say that. He was just saying the invasion is coming. But in fact, you could say he was even giving the Ukrainians advice about how they might counter it in some of those pieces. And if people can read Danny at 1945, and I just talked to him last week. Anyway,
yeah, one thing I'll just say there is, and this is often left out somehow of the Western analyses. Like yesterday, I think there was a big New York Times piece about how how wonderfully successful the Ukrainian military has been over the last 2 months. And I think we do have to say that there these offensive moves into Lugansk and along the Dnieper there near Kherson were quite impressive and surprising, and show a lot of how to put it, let's face it, military skill, high morale. You need highly motivated soldiers. But I mean, one thing Danny, the point he's made again and again, and I have to agree with it, which is like, in modern warfare, to expect troops to advance steadily without air cover, and without superiority in artillery is a mighty and almost unbelievable task. So it's quite stunning what was achieved. However, I think this. To expect that to continue is I think probably wrongheaded. And in general, like that New York Times piece from yesterday, said a lot about artillery and spotting with drones. And yes, Ukraine seems to have mastered that. By the way, the Russians also have gotten a lot better on artillery spotting with drones. So both sides, I would say, are quite good at that now. But again, does that mean air power is not important? No, it's air power remains incredibly important in this equation, and the vast majority of the air power here is Russian.
And now, on the diplomatic question there, are you saying that you think that maybe his annexation of Kherson and Zaporozhye is essentially so he can trade them away and just keep the Donbass, make that look like a compromise kind of situation?
I don't see that. I just the
Because that
way.
seems like biting off a lot and saying this is all officially Russian territory now. He's going to have to flood
Yeah.
that territory with infantry to hold it forever, right?
Correct, and I think that may be a good way to understand the call up of the 300,000, which is like, Russia's moving to endgame. I don't think they have any great expectation that Zelensky and company are going to sign on the dotted line. So I think they seem to be moving toward if I read it, the way I read it is they're moving toward okay, we're going to make a unilateral peace, meaning here's our border. It is these 4 provinces. Again, that might kind of explain why they're trying to nibble some more off of Zaporizhia and close the deal in Donbass, which is what we're seeing, so that they can, claim that they own the vast majority of these provinces. And then
Odessa?
we settle into kind of almost like I guess you would call it a Korean Peninsula situation where there's no formal peace, but the shooting stops, and that's what the Russians may hope for. I mean, like I understand in the Kherson region, they've been using a lot of landmines, and I would expect Russia to deploy, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of landmines to create just, impregnable areas that the Ukrainian army could not possibly march through, especially again without air superiority. So I personally think probably they are moving in that direction. I suspect Putin and his advisors. I mean, Putin is in a very, I think he's in quite a vulnerable situation. I think Russians are growing discontented with this. I mean, they've been discontented, but they're growing more discontented. And I think when the year anniversary comes on February, I guess 24th, I think Putin will. If I had to step into his shoes, I'm pretty sure, which is not easy, but I think he will probably have to say, I fought this for a year, we did our best, and here's what we got, and this is we need to move on. There's so many reasons why Russia is kind of under pressure now, and I think the quasi alliance with China. I don't know if you want to get to that, but I think the Chinese are a bit nervous. So to me, Putin understands that a war that goes on for 2, 3, 5 years will lead to probably the end of his regime.
Yeah. All right. Now, boy, for him to climb down after a year and say, well, we did blow up a lot of their military and got some of Donetsk. Like, I don't know if he's going to be able to do that. These
Mhm.
politicians, right? It's a public choice theory where it's not about Russian national
Well, I
interest; it's
don't,
about
Scott.
his.
I don't know if I agree with you there. I mean, look, again, it's not to. Again, I watch a lot of Russian media, so I can see what they're saying. And the Russians will beat their chests and say, "Hey, we own Mariupol. We got them out of the Sea of Azov. We got the water flowing to Crimea. We liberated. We said we were going to rescue our compatriots in Donetsk and Luhansk, and more or less they did." That I'm just saying I think they probably could, I don't know that they can hold their heads high, but they will go home and say, they did lop off, in the end, 20% of Ukraine. They regard this as their historical land that they have a right to. Would they like more? Absolutely. But I mean, I'm just saying, to me, Putin has to be more than a little nervous that his forces have been, quite unable to break the military deadlock, so that doesn't. And as you pointed out, I mean, just holding the terrain he has got is going to be quite challenging
Yeah.
going forward.
All right, so I do want to talk about China and all that stuff. As long as you got time, I got time to listen to you say things. But I want to stick with this for just a minute. You mentioned
Sure.
strategic nuclear weapons, and I have these pictures that I can't publish. I promised the guy I would never publish them because he doesn't have a proper copyright or this or that. But it's very high quality panorama photographs that his grandfather took of Hiroshima. I guess a 360-degree view of
Wow.
the city completely decimated in high resolution, just absolutely flattened. This is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, a 15 kiloton bomb there, which
Yeah.
is, if correct me if I'm wrong, that's like pretty high on the scale of a low yield tactical nuclear weapon, right?
Yeah, I think I think it was 19 kilotons maybe, but
Okay.
anyway, very close to your estimate. Yes, that you got it right, Scott. Today, there are weapons that can be as low as 5 kilotons, but again, so that's what a quarter of Hiroshima. So still a completely devastating weapon. But yeah, strategic weapons
Well, listen, a lot of people
can be
really
10
don't
times that.
know a lot. People really don't know a lot about nukes. So, can you explain the difference between the size of a Hiroshima bomb or a Nagasaki bomb compared to what you're calling a strategic nuclear weapon here, a thermonuclear bomb?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I believe you know the if I'm not mistaken, the kind of standard strategic weapons are now 100 or 200 times what was exploded at Hiroshima. So they're true city busters and often thermonuclear warheads and I think that mostly Russia considers its arsenal kind of a last resort, and they've never kind of entertained this idea of a strategic level nuclear war that would be limited. So I do believe they would target American cities, and indeed they may have in mind a kind of warning shot, that destroys one, two, three American cities as a kind of um, a reminder of what devastation would follow. It's a horrible way to think, but I guess I'm in the minority here. But I unfortunately think these limited war scenarios are there. I think our side has these scenarios and their side does, and we
Isn't that the
must.
greatest danger, right? That instead of mutually assured destruction, it's we think we can get away with it. But no, it does mean mutually assured destruction, but it just means they try it and then we all die.
Yeah. So that is absolutely why. I mean, nobody knows what would happen. I mean, the famous line, General or Admiral, I've fought as many nuclear wars as you have, meaning nobody knows what would happen. And that's
Yeah.
why, when these nuclear strategists, as you pointed out, when they get up on their high horse and say, here's exactly what would happen, nobody knows. And I hope some of your listeners might see the movie 13 Days again. I just saw it again, to honor the 60th anniversary of the. But I think it's quite a faithful telling, and
About the
here's
Cuban Missile Crisis.
yeah, as a famous General LeMay and Kennedy going several rounds, and General LeMay saying, "Oh, Russia will never resort to its use of nuclear weapons at a strategic level because that would be national suicide." And Kennedy, in the film at least, and I think it's accurate, Kennedy dismisses the comment because he knows that LeMay is just speculating. And are you going to put the future of the planet on somebody's speculation? Absolutely not. And that's why, again, I underline the point that we shouldn't be in these circumstances. It never should have come to this level. We should have fully understood that Ukraine is more or less within the Russian sphere of influence, and that we shouldn't muck around too much in that area. We certainly shouldn't consider coming to blows or even anywhere close to it because of that. The same, by the way, apply the same logic to Taiwan. And if we do get into that mess and muck around and consider a use of force and so forth, that it would quickly escalate. I mean, these are really, to me, this is just strategy 101, and I'm shocked that people in my field are unable to assess that this would be the case and to act with all due caution, which they have not acted with that caution.
Yeah.
That's why I think we're here. But yes, absolutely. Your scenario is the very darkest one. I guess mine is the next to darkest one, which is where this limited nuclear war does unfold with devastating consequences. Tens of millions might die in a limited nuclear war. The planet would end in a full nuclear war for sure.
So Andrew Coburn has this great book on Donald Rumsfeld, his rise, fall, and catastrophic legacy. And they talk about how during the continuity of government exercises in the 1990s, he would often play the president. He was former Secretary of Defense at that time, once in future SecDef. And he would play the president, and how he would lead the world in all the war games to total devastation, even when they had built into the game different off-ramps from the war. Okay, we lost 5 cities and they lost 6, and now everybody calls ceasefire. Nope, he wants to keep going and, spread the war to China or whatever the hell it is. Can't let them be the beneficiaries of us and Russia blowing each other's heads off, right? So got to take them out too, and whatever, just craziness. And then there's just the whole doctrine of use them or lose them, right? That they're going to blow up our submarine pens. They're going to blow up our Minutemen silos. They're going to blow up our Strategic Air Command, all our Air Force bases. So we got to launch those planes and launch those missiles and launch those subs and Polaris missiles and give them everything we've got before they can destroy it. And that's the kind of idiot logic that these brilliant geniuses have. This is their, game theory. I wouldn't understand the algorithm, but it's so smart that it means that they launch everything and kill everybody.
Yeah, I mean, this is all correct. And the thing I find quite strange is that in the Cuban Missile Crisis, actually, we had vast nuclear superiority over the Soviets, and we were still exceedingly careful. And today, we don't have nuclear superiority, not at all. And we're absolutely, I don't know any military analyst who doubts seriously Russia's nuclear deterrence. So, so it's painfully apparent to all that we're considering the apocalypse and Armageddon, as President Biden put it recently. So if that's all true, then why aren't we stepping back? And why, I've always maintained that the only way to get to a peaceful solution in so many of these crises is for the stronger party to use restraint and wisdom, because the weaker party is too afraid to show any kind of weakness. So to me, it is incumbent on the United States to be the wise one, to be to step back. If we can restrain our ideological impulses and think with our heads and not with our hearts, we would quickly come to the conclusion that we need an open line of communication. We need to settle this mess in Ukraine, partly for the sake of the Ukrainians who are still alive, and move to a working relationship with Russia that involves arms control, dialogue, and managing crises, including in the world economy, which we haven't even mentioned. But all these other second and third order effects of these kind of crises are there. I mean, in that cost of war study I did, we calculated that, or I calculated the United States has already spent the equivalent of $10 trillion in 2022 dollars on nuclear weapons, on this wonderful vast arsenal we have, and that's set to continue this for forever if we continue with these kind of very risk laden policies, or we can try other approaches to our security.
Yeah. So, Lyle, real quick, just parentheses for the listeners here. If you're not that familiar, you're kind of new at this. If you just look on YouTube, when you see an atom bomb test in Nevada, that's a little one. When they're testing it out in the Pacific Ocean, those are the big ones, the thermonuclear bombs. So go and take a look at that and see what we're talking about. We're talking about leveling New York City, all 5 boroughs, as though it was made of paper and straw like Hiroshima was. And that kind of deal. So wrap your head around that. But then, so I want to get to what you're saying there about kind of, it's really the social psychology of Washington, D.C. is what you're talking about here, and of Langley and of whatever, Northern Virginia, where the Pentagon is, whatever county that is, that they call this every time. I'm so sick of this my whole life. Oh, we're sleepwalking to war. Well, what does that mean? Everybody's awake. It's just they're stupid. And they're all essentially like a bunch of stupid college kids in a social psychology experiment that says that we have to all agree on this stupid, horrible thing. I know what we'll do. We'll take the side of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, Zarqawi's suicide bomber brigades against Muammar Gaddafi. Why? Because it's the latest fad. And we're sleepwalking to war for Al-Qaeda in Libya because that's what Samantha Power wants or something. And this keeps happening. And now we're talking, a serious conversation here about the possibility of nuclear war. And this is what they say. We're sleepwalking to war, which just means that nobody has the balls to say what you're saying, which is blink into Geneva. What are we doing? How can we continue like this? As you put it, we, meaning the professionals there in the think tanks and so forth on the East Coast, you have a responsibility to keep me from getting nuked, and you're letting me down. And how come you're willing to say that and the rest of them won't? They would rather sleepwalk some more until we're all dead, Lyle. What is going on?
Well, by the way, I have a bit of a theory here that I'm working on to explain some of this behavior, but it's not pretty at all. But I honestly, I think a lot of national security elites in this country, including in Langley and elsewhere, truly embarrassed by what transpired in the, quote, endless wars, right? I mean, and what happened in Kabul was horribly embarrassing for them. After all, we spent at least $500 billion or something just trying to put the Afghan government together so it could function, and then it collapsed in a couple of weeks. So I mean, to cover up that embarrassment, to erase that stain, which is, as you know, is much more about Afghanistan than I do, but it is so humiliating for our country. We need some kind of grand distraction, something to make us look good, feel good about things. And Ukraine has provided just a lovely example in many ways, and I do give credit to brave Ukrainians who were able to hold Kiev and so forth under difficult conditions, but we should have recognized that this would spiral into a disastrous morass, much more dangerous than Afghanistan and so costly. So I mean, it's horrible that we could get to this point. Completely agree. I do. I have to. This is such a dark conversation, though. I want to remind people of a couple of positive things. One thing is President Putin said he would not resort to nuclear use in Ukraine. So I think let's underline that. Sure. So I think we may be at a better place this week than we were last week. And by the way, I just became aware of if you want to talk about China a little, of a Chinese signal. I take it as a trial balloon by a retired PLA colonel named Zhou Bo. B.O. is his. Well, anyway, it's a difficult spelling in Chinese, Z-H-O-U, and then B-O. But he said that in the Financial Times, which is I mean, it's also a little unusual for him to write in the Financial Times. So I think this is a signal, and China was kind of saying in this, or he was saying, Colonel Joe, that China would look very how to put it, be very upset if Russia were to resort to nuclear weapons. So it seems to be this even a kind of overt warning to Russia that it should not use nuclear weapons. So now there are signals the other way too, that China stands by Russia and so forth. But I think that to me probably is also a positive signal, shows that Beijing knows how serious this situation is, and knows that China also loses if there's a Russia-U.S. nuclear war and the planet ends, then that will be absolutely catastrophic for China as well. And therefore maybe Beijing starting to step up and realize it needs to also rein Moscow in a bit, even as it continues to call for peace talks. So we could talk about China's role here, but I was glad to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to change the subject to China in just 1 second, and that's a great segue. But first, I want to, on the last point, I just need your help because I think you're right, and I'm writing a book about this now. That same speech I'm turning into a giant book. But I'm going to have a section on that, and I already have at least one quote from Ben Rhodes, Obama's old guy, but I know there are a couple of others. But I'm collecting quotes of these goons saying, yes, we're pouring weapons into Ukraine because this is our redemption for what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. Never mind what they did to Somalia and Libya and Syria and Yemen. But they say,
this is the good war. By the way, one more thing I want to say.
If you have more of those, like, please email me, because I'm building a stamp collection of Democrats saying, yeah, this is how we make ourselves feel good after all the terrible things that we did. Is doing this other, also even more horrible thing.
Well, I mean, for my part, I would have said, I think after the fall of Kabul, any common sense American would say, could we please now close the CIA? Like, why are we giving these people all this money if what they're doing is worthless? So, the CIA is trying to say, hey, we can still support U.S. interests and do some good things in the world by saving Kiev and all this. But to me, first of all, it doesn't wash away the stain of the last 20 years. And second, I think, one reason we're in this pickle is because we decided that we were going to save Ukraine, and that meant torpedoing all attempts at negotiation, including the Minsk Accord. Another thing I wanted to comment, maybe again, somewhat encouraging. Our conversation has been very dark, but I was in Annapolis last week at a conference. It was kind of a hawk's den. I won't name any names, but many hawkish voices there. And I must say, I was quite surprised how many of them were coming round to the point that, look, okay, yes, they all believe to the hilt that Ukraine needs to be supported and more weapons and billions more for Ukraine. But they also said there has to be eventually there has to be a settlement, and they seem to appreciate the huge damage to the global system and the global economy, even among all these hawks. So anyway, that's a little bit encouraging, I think.
Yeah, it is. And now I'm sorry, because I got to ask you to rewind 1.2. Can you elaborate a little bit about how they torpedoed Minsk?
Oh, well, I mean, I know you followed that closely, as did I, but I mean, my own view is during that critical time, I guess as Trump was handing over to Biden, there was a kind of glimmer of hope right there, because I believe that was when Zelensky and Putin actually sat down together and with Macron and Merkel. And to me, that was a huge opportunity. That was the negotiation in the Normandy format, and applauded Merkel and Macron for putting that together. Trying to kind of knock heads together. I think the meeting between Zelensky and Putin was not a friendly one, but it was also, they got to talk a bit, and that was the way forward. And as I read the signals from Washington at that point, they were all thumbs down. Don't bother with this. we're not at the table. We just need to send more weapons. And the most immediate problem is that God forbid, Zelensky, who was elected to make peace, might actually make peace with Putin. So that was the chance, and at that point, as I read it, Washington wasn't even remotely favorable toward walking this forward, and the Europeans did not get the support that they needed. And both sides walked away and started to build up their forces for the war. So I mean, it's very sad, and that was the last chance, in my view, the last serious chance. There were other. I do think that Biden could have acted differently through the end of that diplomacy in sort of November, December 2021. So maybe there were other chances too, but to me, that was the Minsk did provide an opportunity to give. To give the Donbass region substantial autonomy, but within Ukraine, and Russia probably would have gone along with that and buried the hatchet. But the Ukrainians, I think, were too stubborn, and we ultimately encouraged their stubbornness by saying, "Hey, you just need more javelins."
Sorry, hang on just 1 second. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for Tennessee Hot Sauce Company. Man, this stuff is so good. They get all different flavors. Garlic habanero, honey habanero, pineapple habanero, poblano jalapeno, and the blood orange ghost. They're all so good, I swear. And for a limited time, Tennessee Hot Sauce Company is featuring official Scott Horton Hotter Than the Sun thermonuclear hot sauce. It's full of Carolina Reapers, scorpion peppers, Dr. Pepper, hydrogen isotopes, and all kinds of things that'll burn your tongue clean off. Seriously, it's really good. Get yourself a hot sauce subscription. Spend $40 or more and use promo code SCOTT to get a free bottle of Hotter Than the Sun hot sauce. That's tnhotsauceco.com. Hey, y'all got to check out these awesome busts of our hero, the great Ron Paul. They're made by the renowned sculptor Rick Casali. They're 13 inches tall, hand-painted bronze resin based on Casali's brilliant original. Y'all may have seen mine in the background on my bookshelf in some recent interviews. The thing is unbelievable. Check out this incredible piece of art at rickcasali.com/Ron Paul, and you'll see what I mean. Use promo code Horton and you'll save $25, and this show will get a little kickback too. That's rickcasali.com/Ron Paul. Casali is Casali. rickcasali.com/Ron Paul. And there's free shipping too. What do you think is the role, and I swear we're going to get to China here in a minute. What do you think is the role of America's policy toward Germany in all this? Because I'm reminded of what Chalmers Johnson told me back 20 years ago or something, that in the Cold War, the Americans' greatest fear in the world would have been a Berlin, Moscow, Beijing axis. In other words, for the Reds to take over Berlin. And once Germany and Russia are allied together, then they rule a world island, and America and Britain are frozen out. And so he who controls the pivot land rules the world, and all this stupid stuff left over from Alfred Mackinder and all that. And I'm looking at Merkel back, 10 years ago, saying she wants the Eurasian home alliance with Russia. And as part of that, she wants to build this pipeline. Might as well have called it the peace pipeline, not so that Russia could blackmail Germany, but so that they could be economically interdependent. And it's just funny to me because, first of all, you can tell me whether I'm totally on the mark or not, but it seems like if their biggest fear really is like the worst thing that could ever happen would be an alliance between Germany and Russia. It seems like the last two times the worst thing that ever happened, it was a war between Germany and Russia. And it seems like even if Texans never got to sell another cubic foot of natural gas again, who the hell cares when you look at the opportunity costs for keeping the peace compared to having a war between Germany and Russia? And here looks like we might be dragging Germany into a war with Russia. And the whole thing is nuts. But I just wonder if you think that that's what this whole thing with Ukraine is really all about too, is making sure to prevent the peaceful relationship between Berlin and Moscow there.
Well, I think you've really hit on it, Scott, as usual. I mean, the role of Germany in the future of Europe and in the world generally is of critical importance, and I think I give Merkel and even Schroeder, Gerhard Schroeder, credit for, they had a deep understanding, going way back into German diplomacy to realize that that they absolutely, Germany should never go to war against Russia again. I mean, that to me was the kind of bottom line plank of German diplomacy, and they were absolutely right. And they really have strayed away from that now, and taken a much more hawkish line, and that's in line with sort of American diplomacy and American interests. And I'm kind of surprised that the German politics has not provided more of a buffer here, although, I do think Schultz deserves some credit a little bit. He tried to, I think, do some last minute diplomacy. He couldn't deliver, I guess. He has, I think, of course, the Hawks say he's dragging his feet, but I think probably wisely drawn a line at German tanks. I mean, he knows that the optics of, hundreds or thousands of of German Leopard tanks surging across the Ukrainian plain is not an optic that is supports German interests, German, how they identify themselves in the world. So I think that's correct, and I'm glad that he is kind of drawing a line there. I'm glad that he's taking off for China. I mean, he's trying to kind of hold the door open on kind of, in my view, to kind of a multipolarity, which is really, I think, what the world does need, and not this kind of bipolarity from the 1950s. I'm very disappointed in the current foreign minister in Germany. I think she is she seems to have gone from being a somebody who would promote peace and more ecologically sensitive future. I thought that's what the Greens were about. Apparently has turned out to be a big hawk. And that to me is just shows sort of, I don't know, the Germans are not very, haven't thought this through. Actually, I'm hoping to get to Berlin in the near future, but I'm surprised that how Germany has drifted away from its holding the line here on what could be disastrous for Germany. After all, Germany really could, unfortunately, if this is a limited nuclear war, unfortunately, I believe Germany would be right up there in the crosshairs, unfortunately. So
because we have nuclear weapons stationed in their country, right? At our
right, exactly, and I just think. It's going to take some guts, but Germany needs to step up here and play this kind of balancing game that they played quite successfully. More or less, I'd like to see a revival of Ostpolitik, where Germany, given its history, it's incumbent on Germany not to send tanks, but rather to promote diplomacy and economic interdependence. As you said, the pipeline was not a mistake. It was done very purposefully to preserve this critical relationship, and that relationship should be preserved.
Lyle, what does it mean that the president of France is calling the Pope and beseeching him to beseech Biden to talk to Russia? Things really are that desperate. I mean, it just sounds, I don't like being that alarmist. It's kind of part of the reason why I was like, I don't know if they're really going to invade, because I hate it when I'm an alarmist and then my alarming thing doesn't happen. That's embarrassing. But then the president of France apparently feels like if he just calls Biden, that's worthless. So he's going to the Pope. Is that an emergency, or is that just something in the news cycle and I just picked it out and put some importance on it more than it deserves? Or
I think you're saying something quite important. I mean, unfortunately, in Europe,
I'm tired of you telling me I'm right this whole interview long. It's really frustrating.
In Europe, I think they're justifiably, their hair is on fire. I mean, from every point of view, economic, diplomatic, security. In the United States, everything is sort of not hunky dory, but I mean, things are going okay, and somehow I think, Biden has set up this kind of messianic struggle between authoritarian states and democracies and finds this kind of favorable to Democratic Party interests. So and the Democrats seem to be, well, I guess we have to say all on board. So I mean, it's very, very troubling, and just shows, I think, immense failure of responsible authorities to understand the nuclear risks and to walk back from the brink. And I mean, again, everybody's saying this, but it's right. It's like, how can diplomacy be a bad word? It's just,
Yeah.
you know.
All right. Now, so obviously major points here about China, and I won't keep you for another hour, but the headline is Biden sends B-52s to Australia. And the threat they claim is that China, and I like your interpretation of the comments of the great dictator over there at the recent commie party meeting that they held and everything. But Blinken says he thinks they're going to invade Taiwan by the end of the year. And they have said, forget ambiguity and one China. We're on the side of the sovereign state of Taiwan pretty damn much. And so should we all be at DEF CON 2 over that? That was a joke. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, my view on how dangerous this is that it's very dangerous. I've been saying this for a long time. You talked about alarms, being alarmist and worried when your alarms are ignored or whatever. I've been saying the sky is falling on Taiwan policy for more than a decade. So
Oh, I don't mind that. The only thing that bothers me is when I'm too alarmist and the bad thing I was worried about doesn't happen. Then I kind of look like a jerk. And I think sometimes I'm
right.
overly conservative when I should be more of a wingnut,
Yeah, well, I guess I'll call me a wingnut. I'm immensely concerned. I think there are reasons to believe that China would move against Taiwan earlier rather than later, and I'll spell out my logic in a second. But generally, I do think it's fair to say that this whole Ukraine war has given China quite a substantial scare. I mean, that's, I think, the conventional wisdom, and I think it's probably quite correct. That is, they've seen just how isolated Russia is in some ways, how the West can wield all these tools of financial power and so forth, and then and they've seen how even a military that seemingly where Putin is very confident and I think overestimated his military power. So all these things I think are bothering the Chinese. That's on the one hand, but on the other hand, there are a lot of disturbing trends here. I do think that the Chinese military is substantially prepared for the invasion. I think that they are, this is a country that has about almost 5 times the military budget of Russia. And, like I said informally when I was describing Russia's military is stretched in at least 6 or 7 directions, only one of which is Ukraine. China, not so much. I mean, sure, they worry a little bit about India, but mostly China's military is more focused on the Taiwan problem. And they can move those troops and be ready to go very, very quickly. I mean, and also Taiwan is much smaller than Ukraine. People are, it's been pointed out that Taiwan is about the size of Luhansk province. Okay. And also it can be cut off quite easily. So there would be no volunteers. The weapons would not be flowing at all, in my view, to Taiwan in a crisis. So now, but here's the nub of my concern. I think the Chinese have been watching all these javelins and stingers and HIMARS and harpoons, all of this stuff, all this glitzy weaponry that we've revealed for everyone. By the way, the Chinese are busy scribbling counter, how do they learn the lessons, how to fight against this. But more than that, I think there's a lot of concern in Beijing that if all these weapons, all the weapons I just named are piling up in Taiwan, and by the way, most of these weapons shipments are delayed because they're all going to Ukraine right now. So a lot of this weaponry doesn't arrive in Taiwan until 2026, 2027, 2028. So then China looks at the clock and says, now's the best time to go before all that stuff shows up there on the island. So that has really, I don't know if what you want to call that, the Goldstein window. I'm very concerned about the next couple of years on Taiwan, and but I'm concerned generally, partly because I think China is building up its nuclear arsenal. I don't have a doubt in my mind that the leadership is committed to this. And if they unlike Russia, where Putin's in a lot of trouble because a lot of Russians have been killed and the economy is really suffering. In China, they've budgeted for all this. I mean, they're literally quite willing to lose hundreds of thousands of soldiers to conquer Taiwan, and that is kind of Trump's. I mean, if so they have not only do they have, in my view, they have the capability imbalance favors China by a lot, but it's also an asymmetry of will, meaning they consider this a core interest, and most Americans can't find Taiwan on a map, and that's not going to change.
Well, now, is our Navy sleep sailing to the bottom of the Pacific here? In other words, they attack Taiwan and it's automatic. Old sleepy Joe Biden leans on the lever and everything goes into motion, and then it's another slippery slope to nuclear war.
By the way, I didn't mention that another reason why China may choose to go in the next year or two is they may want to do this while the Ukraine war is going on. So that's another factor.
Sense, yeah.
I don't know about that, but it's definitely a plausible idea. I mean, think about how much of Langley right now. I'd have to believe that 3/4 of Langley right now is literally just watching back roads in Ukraine all day.
Yeah, that does make sense.
And that the Chinese realize that is advantageous to them because they're not watching back roads in Fujian province, right?
Yeah, but I mean, on the question of how certain the Americans are that they would go to war with China over Taiwan at the drop of a hat, and there's no question about that. It's all in the blue notebook, and that's the one you pull off the shelf as soon as the war commences, right or not?
Well, I don't think so. I hope not. I personally believe that this is a bridge too far, that this is not something that we should do, that there's
but what's the consensus is what
there.
I'm asking, I guess.
Right. Okay. Well, I guess there's a difference between should and would. Well, Biden has definitely made noises like that. Again, if you look at the polling and things like that, you see a lot of that Americans there's no consensus among the public. So
what about
I
the Naval War College?
Though national security elites tend to lean forward on this and say, yes, we can handle this, particularly from what we learned in Ukraine. But I guess I'm arguing against that because I do think, as you pointed out, that not only might we, lose a heck of a lot of ships, and I'm talking about literally half of our Navy, that concerns me a lot. But there's a substantial chance that a lot of American air bases would be hit. That I think the CSIS game we got a hint of last summer, I think, showed something like 700 U.S. combat aircraft getting shot down. I believe that game probably underestimated U.S. losses. And my view is, yes, this absolutely could also go nuclear for rather similar reasons. And by the way, it may be the U.S. that has to resort to nuclear weapons to try to end this on favorable terms for the United States. So I mean, it's we should not go to war against another nuclear power. I mean, we need to use wise diplomacy to avoid that. And Taiwan is the wrong place to make a defense. We have strong force in the Asia Pacific, and we have allies out there who are strong. But so I don't think we have to be particularly worried about U.S. national security or the defense of Japan or something like that. So why we would seek to try to defend an island that's 90 miles off of Chinese shores and has literally the title of the island of Taiwan in its constitution is the Republic of China. So why we would insist on getting involved in another civil war is.
Yeah, well, see, that's the whole key is, I mean, first of all, ever since Bill Clinton, we can get involved in the Civil War whenever we feel like it, but also they refuse to accept that it's a civil war. They pretend that Taiwan hasn't been a part of China since the 1600s and that it's, somewhere near California's coast, not China's or something. But now let me ask you this, because you are from the Naval War College. I know you must eat in the cafeteria with the boys and all that, or you did before you changed jobs there. So you got like a temperature on the consensus of the experts. And I know this can really cut either way, right? Either, yeah, let us at them because we're the Navy and we can kick their ass and we know exactly what their capabilities are and what ours are. And we got great plans and we're so macho and look at us. Or it could be actually we ran 6 or 10 war games and we lost every time and we got really sober and thought, man, we don't want to lose aircraft carriers to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, have to explain to the president why he has to break out the H-bombs now. And so maybe they're a little older and wiser adults running the Navy would try to advise the president that maybe he shouldn't get them into this mess or something. I know I'm just fantasizing here, but I mean, you have to know, certainly a hell of a lot better than me, what they think about that, whether they're just, brash, tough guys sail into war, or whether they actually might be preaching caution here because they maybe know better and don't want to drown.
Well, from 20 years working for the Navy, I would say I did hear a lot of both. So I know that's not a very helpful answer, but I mean, there's a lot of bravado and a lot of, the idea that, I mean, military officers tend to take a view of like, they're given a mission and they're not going to say they can't do it. They're going to say they will do it, so that I mean, it kind of, I think, calls out the need for independent specialists to look at this, right? Who are, can apply some common sense. That's what I've tried to do over time. I was not really involved in wargaming this out there, partly by design. I just didn't want to be involved in that. I go to China a lot and things like that. So I was trying to stay out of that, but I kept aware of public comments on that. And one of them, you can find, I think the name is David Akmanek, in an article called Real Clear Investigations that came out in 2020. He was at RAM, but he was also an assistant secretary of defense. And he was very emphatic. He said, we lose every single game that we put together. The U.S. gets, I believe the phrase he used in that article is, we get our ass handed to us. So, that was I believe that article came out, again, Real Clear Investigations in 2020. I think if you Google David Akmanek, you should find that. I'm also quoted in that article, but he, so I mean, I think Fareed Zakaria has alluded to this too. So other people have said this, that the game after game. Now, there was this recent game at CSIS where they said the U.S. won, but suffered like horrendous casualties, including 2 aircraft carriers down. Look, I generally, I think people in the know, including those in the Navy, realize this would be incredibly costly, and that we need to try to use diplomacy if we absolutely can. I mean, if we, we better explore all those avenues. So, but yeah, I mean, as in any, I mean, the sad truth is that I think people realize that this scenario is incredibly helpful to the Navy budget. So, and by the way, the Ukraine war is incredibly helpful to the Army budget. So, I mean, and the Air Force is sailing on both of those wins. So, I mean, unfortunately, the Pentagon and the whole national security elite is kind of addicted to these crisis and endless crises, if you will. And the great power competition floats all boats in the military-industrial complex. So we need some truth tellers out there to say this is just not in the U.S. national interest. We can find ways to get along with Russia and China. Neither Taiwan nor the Ukraine are they're certainly not core interests, but they really have no great value to U.S. national security. Quite the opposite. They are drawing us inexorably toward wars and potentially nuclear wars. So we need to define our national security differently, Scott. And that's one thing we're trying to do at Defense Priorities.
All right, you guys, that is Lyle J. Goldstein. No wonder you're Big Brother's official enemy. Yeah, you like that 1984 joke. Defense Priorities and the Cost of War Project at Brown University, which is such an important singular resource for the anti-war movement there. So glad to see you're affiliated with them. you guys take a look at the long version of this. It's really worth the read. Threat inflation, Russian military weakness, and the resulting nuclear paradox. Implications for the war in Ukraine for U.S. military spending by Lyle Goldstein from September the 15th, 22. Thank you again for your time, Lyle. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott. Always enjoy talking to you.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.